Welcome to episode 17 of Real Health Radio.
Welcome to Real Health Radio. Health advice that's more than just about how you look. And here's your host, Chris Sandel.
Hey, and welcome to this week's episode of Real Health Radio. And today's show is all about sleep. And it's one of the most undervalued promoters of health. And things like diet and exercise, they always take center stage. But honestly, sleep is just important as this stuff. And often it's even more important. And so it doesn't matter how well you're eating or how much you're working out. Like, if sleep is poor, you're going to suffer. And what I find is that a lot of people understand the importance of sleep, but for them it feels out of their control. So they're trying to sleep better, but it just doesn't work. So they have trouble getting to sleep, or they wake up in the night and they're awake for a couple of hours, or they toss and turn the whole night and it never feels particularly restful. And so they tell me when we chat that they eat healthy, that they don't have coffee in the afternoon, that they go to bed early, and it just doesn't work for them. So what I'm going to do as part of today's podcast is look at some of the things that can be affecting or causing poor sleep and how you can avoid or remedy this stuff. And some of these are going to be obvious, like caffeine, but for other things, it won't be stuff that you instantly think of. But before I go into the importance of sleep, I think an understanding of the body and what happens during the daytime is necessary. Sunlight and sleep are like yin and yang, and they help each other out and create balance. So getting proper restorative sleep at night is greatly helped by proper sunlight during the day. So let me explain why this is the case. So the sun and its rays have a beneficial influence over our health, and most ancient civilizations used to worship the sun or a sun god, and there was good reason for this. I mean, you obviously had the sun's positive effects on foods and on crops, but it's also in terms of sunlight's impact on health. An example of this would be vitamin D, which is created when the skin is exposed to sunlight. And vitamin D promotes the absorption of calcium in the gut and transfers calcium into our cells. From this, we get healthier teeth and healthier bones. Vitamin D is supportive to our immune system and the resistance against certain diseases. Sunlight alongside vitamin D also helps to increase endorphins in the brain, which makes us happier and better functioning in terms of our nervous system. So sunlight has other roles as well outside of just vitamin D production. Not only does sunlight enter the body through the eyes, allowing vision, the light also goes into the brain and it affects the hypothalamus and the pituitary. And these two glands, they look after lots of different functions. So things like heart rate and digestion and breathing, thirst, respiration, sexual arousal, reproduction, stress response, immune function, circadian rhythm. So all very important functions that are the better for getting sunlight in. And it's not just the sunlight affecting our brains. Inside each and every one of our cells, we have a mini organ known as the mitochondria. And so some cells will have just one mitochondria, while other cells will have thousands. And the mitochondria is often described as the cellular power plant in our cells, and it's where your cells produce most of their energy. And sunlight actually stimulates your mitochondria to produce more energy. So the sunlight penetrates through your skin and into your cells, where it turns on an enzyme in the mitochondria to increase energy production. And this means that if you eat the same amount of food in the summertime where there's lots of light versus in the wintertime when there's lots more darkness, your body will actually be able to create more energy from that same food in the summertime. And while sunlight stimulates energy production, darkness has the opposite effect. So it causes the mitochondria to shrink and to produce less energy. And with light, it's made up of lots of different wavelengths. And where light falls on the spectrum in terms of wavelength will impact on how far it will penetrate into the body and the effects that it's going to have. So for example, UV, so ultraviolet light and blue light, it tends to suppress our cells' ability to produce energy, Whereas red light and near infrared light, this is where light is really beneficial. And this is the light that then gets into our cells and really helps the mitochondria. And it helps in terms of increasing energy production. And our sunlight naturally produces the full spectrum of light. But depending on where you are in the world, wintertime, like where I am now in the UK, is a time where there's much less light. And the light is much more diminished, not just from the fact that there's less coming through from the sun, but there's less getting into the body because in the cooler weather, people are rugged up. Less of their skin is exposed to be able to take in that light. And so your ability to get good amounts of light in during the wintertime is much more hampered. And if you go back to the good old days, houses and offices were filled with incandescent light bulbs. And the incandescent light bulbs will actually produce light in this right wavelength. So more of the red and near infrared light, which is very helpful for stimulating energy production. But with the move towards more energy-sparing light bulbs, we've actually changed the spectrum of light and the wavelength. And these new bulbs, while they may be saving energy, are actually producing much more of a bluer field and a bluer light. And this can impair energy production. And I would say the same thing about lights from TVs and from laptops. These produce a lot of blue light. And this is something that I'm going to come back to when we're looking at sleep because it can have a real negative impact on sleep. So our body follows a 24-hour cycle known as the circadian rhythm. And this affects biochemical, physiological, and behavioral processes within the body. And the cycle and its functions are controlled by the 24-hour phase of light and darkness. And I know we've evolved, but we are still very much animals, and we are affected by this light and darkness. And if you look at the fact that we have 24-hour a day available light in terms of artificial light, this doesn't change the fact that we are animals and we're still in tune with the natural rhythm of night and day. And as an example of just how dependent animals are on the light and dark cycles, during a solar eclipse, birds and other creatures will go to sleep in the daytime, and then nocturnal animals like bats or owls will come out thinking that it's nighttime. So that night and dark or light and dark has such an impact. And if you look at a normal day for humans and how light and dark affects our body, so whenever light stimulates the eyes or the skin, the body tends to think that it's morning time. And as the sun rises, the light stimulates the body to produce cortisol, which is released from your adrenal glands. And most people talk about cortisol as being a stress hormone, but it actually has lots of functions within the body. So in instances like in the morning time when cortisol is starting to come up, it's actually more of an activating hormone, and it prepares the body for movement, for work, for any kind of activity. And it moves you from that sleep into more of that waking phase. And our body's whole psychological system really developed a long time ago, so well before fire and well before artificial lights. So the body typically works on the equation that light equals sunshine and releases cortisol for daytime activities. And cortisol levels will naturally rise from about sunrise, so typically around about 4 a.m., 5 a.m., depending on where you are in the seasons, for the next 2 to 3 or so hours, peaking at around about 8 or 9 a.m. And levels then slowly drop, but remain at a decent amount until about midday. And as the afternoon wears on, cortisol will drop down further and drop down more significantly, especially as the sun goes down. So as your cortisol levels fall, your pineal gland, which is another gland within the body, begins to release melatonin. And melatonin, which is commonly known as the sleep hormone, is released as light decreases. And this is why it can be common in the wintertime for you to start to feel sleepy in the afternoon at around about 4 p.m. just because it starts to get darker outside. And this is obviously going to affect people more who are further away from the equator, where you have much more of the difference between light and dark depending on the seasons. And that secretion of melatonin will continue until around about the middle of the night. And then it suddenly starts to fall back down, or gradually starts to fall back down until about morning time. And the release of melatonin is inhibited by light and permeated by darkness. So when there's darkness, it increases. When there's light, it decreases. But sunlight actually stimulates its production. So studies have shown that an increased exposure to light, and preferably light or normal daylight during the daylight hours, increases that production of melatonin. So when melatonin is then released in the nighttime, it helps the body to relax and it prepares it for sleep. And as you drift off to sleep, melatonin increases in the blood, and this melatonin has a real positive impact on the quality of the sleep that you get. It does this by increasing the amount of rapid eye movement sleep that you get, as well as the amount of slow wave sleep or deep sleep. And this is as a proportion to total sleep. So it means that you're getting the type of sleep each night that helps you to be repairing and to wake up feeling refreshed and energized. And so this is obviously quite a simplified explanation about what's going on. There's lots more hormones that are involved outside of just cortisol and melatonin, but that should give you at least a basic understanding of what's happening throughout the day and also the nighttime with being awake and sleep. So at different times of the night, different things are happening while you sleep. So between about 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. is when your body's doing more of its physical repair, or at least that should be happening, or is happening in much higher amounts if someone's asleep. And during this time, your brain will release chemicals that really enhance your immune system. And so if you've ever had a cough or a cold or flu-like symptoms, you'll often notice that it gets worse just before bedtime or as the night goes on. And this is your immune system increasing and starting to deal with stuff at this time. But it's not just your immune system, it's also lots of other repair processes and other physical repair going on between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. So this is repair to bones, to muscles, to organs, to tissues. If you've been exercising during the day, this is the time where sleep is really vital to make the most of that exercise and for your body to make the adaptations accordingly. And this is then followed by psychogenic or mental repair. And this takes place from about 2 a.m. until whenever you wake up. And this is how you process the mental and emotional events of the previous day. And so it's how you then refresh your mind for the day ahead. And so it assists in piecing together all those unrelated ideas and memories, in creating connections that increase creativity and enhancing performance and learning and memory. It's why people say sleep on an idea and you wake up the next day and you've worked it all out. Or it's why you often have those really crazy dreams just before waking up, as you're trying to piece together the different interactions and conversations that you've previously had. And this repair, whether we're talking about the physical repair or the mental repair, takes energy. And while someone may be lying on their back and they feel like they're doing nothing, the body is actually having to use a fair bit of energy to go through that sleep process. And it's also why sleep is so important for infants and children and adolescents, times of great growth and also learning. And it's also why sleep is so important for recovery. And that can be recovery from illness, it can be recovery from exercise, etc. And these aren't the only benefits of sleep. I mean, sleep has many positive impacts on the body. So sleep affects our hunger signals and when we feel full, as well as the types of foods that we crave. And it does this largely by its effect on leptin and ghrelin, which are two important hormones. So leptin is a very powerful and influential hormone that is produced by our fat cells, and it acts on receptors in the brain where it inhibits appetite. So basically it's the hormone that tells the body whether you're hungry or whether you're full and when you should stop eating. It also guides whether food will be stored for fat or used for energy. And so while most people haven't heard of leptin, it is really important as part of the body's metabolism. And so ghrelin is another hormone to do with hunger. And ghrelin levels, which are produced by the stomach and the pancreas, they increase before meals and then decrease after a meal or decrease as you're eating. And as such, higher levels of ghrelin increase food intake and increase fat mass. And it's been shown that if someone's not getting adequate sleep, they will have decreased levels of leptin and increased levels of ghrelin. And what this means is that they're naturally hungrier during the day. They have a poorer assessment of when they're actually full. And more of that food that they're eating is stored as fat than being used as energy. And so all of these factors lead to someone who's not getting proper sleep having a greater risk for putting on weight, but also being less in touch with their body and what food it really needs to support it versus food that it's just craving because of lack of sleep. And better quality sleep is shown to decrease your chances of diabetes. It lowers inflammation. So this can be inflammation where people are getting obvious pain, but also inflammation in terms of lots of diseases have an inflammatory component to them. Proper sleep helps to lower stress levels. I talked about helping to consolidate learning and memory. Well, getting proper sleep also then impacts on the next day. So when you're sleeping well, it helps with your attention, your concentration, and being able to think clearer. It's super important for recovery from exercise. And so often clients are spending considerable amounts of time in the gym, but they're then having poor sleep. And it feels like such a waste because sleep is actually where you get the benefits out of the exercise you've done. Like if you're wanting to build muscle, it's not in the gym that this actually happens. It's when you're sleeping and repairing. And exercise is about the adaptations that the body makes after that exercise. And sleep is where those adaptations take place. Sleep is also crucial for sexual health and for fertility. So poor sleep decreases libido. And I talked about sleep in terms of leptin levels and leptin being something that impacts on our hunger. Well, leptin also is important for a woman's ovulation. And so lower levels of leptin can make it more likely that a woman's not going to ovulate and can have an impact on their cycle. And it's not just leptin. I mean, sleep affects all of the reproductive hormones in terms of progesterone and estrogen and luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. And these are all crucial for reproduction. And I know a lot of them get talked about much more for women, but they're also important hormones for men in terms of reproduction as well. And with men specifically, poor sleep can lead to a decrease in the number of sperm that they have, as well as the sperm that they do have being of low quality. And part of the reason for why this can happen is poor sleep actually reduces the amount of testosterone levels in men. So hopefully this gives you some good reasons to why sleep is so important and why it should be prioritized. But I think even with this knowledge, the environment that we now live in just doesn't help us. We've evolved over the last couple of millions of years, but it's only in the last 100 years that we've had widespread use of light bulbs and then a much shorter time for devices like the television and computers and now mobile phones and tablets. And lights, TV screens, computer screens, all of these things flicker on and off at between 60 and 120 cycles a second, which the body interprets as being morning sunlight. And this light is much more weighted between or towards the blue spectrum. And light within the blue spectrum negatively impacts on our cells' ability to produce energy. It stimulates cortisol and it then suppresses melatonin. And the problem with this, or one of the problems with this, is cortisol's lifespan within the blood. When cortisol is released, it can take many hours for this to clear. And because this cortisol then prevents the release of melatonin, it means that even if you go to bed, you can be missing out on a lot of the benefits of sleep because you're not getting those benefits because melatonin impacts on that stuff. And so people are often coming home from work and they're spending many hours in front of the television, or they're having to work and being on a laptop, or they're looking at their phone or their tablet while lying in bed. And this means that often people are getting to sleep a lot later than otherwise they would, but it also then creates the chemical problem within the body in terms of how it affects cortisol and melatonin. So as I said, physical repair takes place between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. So if you're going to bed around 11:30 or 12, you've already missed out on a large chunk of this repair time. If you're then also staring at a computer screen or watching TV up until the point of going to sleep, this is then further exacerbated and more of the repair time is missed out on because you have to wait then for that cortisol to clear and the melatonin to come up. So if staying awake it's late is an occasional thing, then it's not really a problem. Like, people have busy lives and schedules, and things will come up that means it's impossible to go to bed always at an early time, or that everything's always going to work to plan. But the problem starts to arise when this is an ongoing issue, where people are consistently going to bed really late, and especially if they've then been spending those hours on a computer, sending emails, or sitting in front of a TV. I mean, you're just setting yourself up for trouble. So I want to look at then some suggestions for things that you can do to improve your sleep. And as part of this, I'm going to touch on some different issues that I regularly see happening and what can be the most likely causes of this. And I should add that these suggestions are what is best on paper or what research suggests. And undoubtedly, you'll know someone who sleeps 5 hours a night and is fit as an ox, or someone who's able to have a double espresso and then go straight to sleep. And if these things work for certain people, then I'm not going to argue it with them. But what I want to provide you with is ideas that I would think would be the best things to try out because of what research shows. The other thing I'll add is children can really mess up people's best laid plans around sleep. So if you have kids that wake you up throughout the night or some nights, really just do the best that you can. And be looking at, okay, what are the things that have been impacted on by the children, and versus what are the things that are actually happening even if the kids aren't waking me up. And just taking this stuff into account when you're listening to my certain comments or me talking about what I think is appropriate or what should happen when, etc. So as much as possible, I recommend that people should aim to be going to sleep by 10:30. And this will mean normally getting into bed earlier than this, as this normally takes 10, 15, 20 minutes or so to fall off to sleep if someone's in good health. And if you're going to bed, say at 12 o'clock at the moment, like so midnight or even later than this, like the idea of going to bed at 10:30 or getting into bed at 10 can seem impossible. So make changes then at a pace that's right for you. So start moving your bedtime 30 minutes earlier in the first week. And then the next week, do it a little bit more. So the more you can be pulling that down, or the more nights that you can be pulling that down, the better. So it might be, to start with, you just make the aim of, okay, 3 nights a week, I'm going to try and make that happen. Like, really whatever works for you. But as I mentioned before, in terms of physical repair time, it's typically taking place between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. So the more consistently you can be sleeping during that time, the best. The next one would be wake up no earlier than 6 a.m. And the latter part of the sleep is where most of your mental repair is taking place, and it's important to not miss out on this if you can. And once again, this will depend on your demands and your life and your job. Like, some people have no choice about getting up at 5:30 a.m. each day. And if this isn't in your control, then you're just going to have to deal with it. But if it is something that you can control and you can be getting up later, then I would be suggesting to do that. In regards to bedtime and waking time, you should be a little flexible depending on seasons. So naturally, we need more sleep in the wintertime and we need less sleep in the summertime. And this may mean for you, you need to be stricter on the sleeping in front, on the free sleeping front in the winter, and you can be a little bit looser in terms of the summertime. I know personally, I'm someone who needs a lot of sleep, whether it be summer or winter time. And in the winter time, I'll often get between 9 and 10 hours a night. And then in the summertime, it's more like 8 or 9 hours. Compare your waking times on your weekdays versus your weekends. And what I would say is really they should be fairly similar. So your body should be in a good natural rhythm about when it wakes up. So on the weekend, you should naturally be waking around about the same time as you do during the week. And this won't always be the case, because some people then have a tendency on a Friday night or a Saturday night to go to bed much later than they would during the week. But if we remove that variable, wake up time should be fairly similar during the week and on the weekend. And when I speak to clients, it's not uncommon for people who during the week normally get up at 6:30 or 7 o'clock. On the weekends, they're sleeping until 10 or 11, or they feel like they need to spend all day in bed. And if there is this big discrepancy between the weekdays and the weekends, it can really demonstrate that you have a lot of sleep debt and that the body is trying to catch up on. And this should be a fair indicator that you need to be getting more sleep during the week and or not going to bed so late on the weekend. And I'd also say that sleep amount and timing will also vary depending on where your health is at, because sleep's so important for the body in terms of repair. If you're in need of lots of healing, you may need to be doing more sleeping. So it's not uncommon with clients when I'm working with them that they're sleeping 10 or 12 hours a day, sometimes more. And sometimes this will all be in the evening time. For others, they're needing to have naps during the day. And for some people, I know this isn't possible if they're working a normal job, but there'll be clients that I'm seeing whose health has got so bad they've had to give up work. And so the point to remember is to focus on your own health and focus on what works for you and not to just follow some blanket advice. If you need to recover, then in the short term, you should be getting more sleep, and there's nothing wrong with this. And generally with a couple of weeks or maybe a month or 2 months of this extra sleep, people are normally feeling much better and they're then needing a lot less sleep than they did during their heavy repair stage. Another suggestion would be to be sleeping in complete darkness or as close to as possible. So getting some blackout blinds are best to make sure minimal light is coming in when you're trying to sleep. And this just means that you're getting deeper sleep and you aren't affected by light stimulating while you're trying to sleep. And I know that for me personally, there's a big difference that I notice from when I used to live in London versus now I'm out in the country. And in London, there'd always be light coming from street lights or other buildings or from cars on the road. Whereas where I am now, I'm so far removed from all of that stuff that when I turn off the lights, like the room is properly dark. And so I don't need to be using blackout shutters or anything along those lines. Minimize your exposure to bright lights in the evening time. So for the hours leading up to bed, as much as possible, we'll be dimming your lights. I know some people will suggest using candles, and as quaint as that may sound, it can be helpful for people. Interestingly, before the invention of the light bulb, people slept on average 10 hours a night. So think about how different that is to today. The next suggestion would be no TV or computers just before bed. And as I mentioned, the flickering of the lights will stimulate cortisol and suppress restorative sleep. There's been research done on insomniacs, and it shows that they have much higher levels of blood levels of cortisol than those who do not have sleep problems. So creating that problem yourself of pushing up cortisol by looking at TVs or a computer just before bed is going to be more likely to lead to the same issues in terms of an insomniac. And I know that you've got to live in the real world. And as someone who runs their own business, it's not always the easiest rule to follow in terms of not being on a laptop late at night. And I don't watch that much TV in the evening time, but there are times where I do need to be working on my laptop at night. And I'm pretty good with shutting things off as much as possible. But I've got lots of clients who are dotted around the world. And because of time zones, it means that there are evenings each week where I do need to be on my computer and be working late into the night time. One suggestion I would say with this, if you do need to use a laptop in the evening, I highly recommend downloading a program called Flux. Flux runs in the background of your computer and it makes adjustments to the color of the screen based on the time of the day. And so during the daytime, you don't notice any difference. But as the sun goes down and it gets dark outside, the light of the screen changes. And so it takes out all of that blue light and your screen gets a little bit more of a reddy or orange hue. And when I originally downloaded it, I noticed it for the first couple of days. Now I don't even notice it. And it's amazing when I turn it off, how bright the screen then becomes. You can also get filters that you put over your TV or your tablet or your phone that will block out 100% of the blue light. And these are things that you don't have to have on all the time. You can just put them on in the evening time to stop that damaging effect of blue light. You can also get glasses that you can wear that block out blue light from your house lights and from the TV, etc., from entering through your eyes. And so it really depends on how far you want to take this stuff. But if you're really keen to improve the quality of your sleep, but you know there's no way you can avoid being on your laptop or your tablet or watching TV, then the filters and or the glasses can be a helpful suggestion. And I'll put some links to this stuff in the show notes. I would suggest avoiding caffeine after around about lunchtime. Caffeine has a really long half-life in the body, and this can block proper restorative sleep. I'd say that this is the case whether someone feels it or not. And I know plenty of people who can have a coffee and then go straight to sleep. And while they may not notice it, I still think it's going to be impacting on the quality of sleep and the repair that's being done while they're sleeping. I would also say limiting alcohol is also a good suggestion, as alcohol can prevent you from falling into a real deep sleep. So often when you have alcohol, you can fall asleep pretty easily, but it will prevent restful sleep and the repair process that should be happening while you're sleeping. And everyone has different tolerance levels, and a glass of wine in the evening with dinner for a lot of people is not going to cause a problem, and it's actually fine for them to have that. For other people, that will be too much. And for everyone, I think having a large amount of alcohol is probably where the problems really arise. And this is definitely going to be impairing on you getting restorative sleep. And worse still, if you're someone who finds that you can't fall asleep unless you've had a drink. And if this is the situation, then this is a real indicator that something needs to be done, because the alcohol may be removing your symptom, i.e. allowing you to sleep, but long term it's going to really be impacting on your health, because as I said, you're not getting that repair going on underneath. Making sure you're eating enough food is really important for sleep. As I said, there's a lot of work going on while you're asleep, and your body needs adequate energy to make this happen. And if someone is having nightmares, if they're having night sweats, if they need to urinate in the night, if they're grinding their teeth, they're having difficulty falling asleep, or they're waking in the night, like all of these things for me are indicators of insufficient energy as well as increased stress hormones. So while you sleep, stress hormones should be pretty low. So throughout the night, adrenaline goes through little waves. So it'll move up and down in little pulses, but it's normally on the lower side, and it's normally these pulses in a very narrow band. If you're running low on energy, then adrenaline will start to increase. And for a lot of people, it can really increase and peak around sort of 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. And this can cause you to have restless sleep or cause someone to wake up. And when it's quite chronic, it can cause someone to wake up with a feeling of a panic attack. It can also lead to teeth grinding and nightmares and night sweats. And if you look at cortisol, so another stress hormone, cortisol, following the natural circadian rhythm, is at its lowest around about midnight through to about 4 a.m. And it's then from about 4 a.m. that it starts to increase and peaks anywhere between 7 a.m., 8 a.m., 9 a.m., just depending on what time of year it is. If you're in a low energy state, then it will start to come up either earlier or it will start to come up higher, and both of these things can be interrupting sleep. Or if you've been in a real stress state before going to sleep, it won't have even come down as much as it should have. And so this means that the quality of sleep that you experience is really a reflection upon what you've done during that day and how well you've treated your body and mediated it with food. And if you've eaten well to meet your demands, you should then be sleeping fairly soundly. And if you haven't, then sleep is going to be disturbed, and this can happen in a variety of different ways. I would say that if your health is poor and you have sleep issues that are quite chronic, it might not matter how well you eat on a particular day, you still may have those problems, because one day of good eating properly isn't enough to repair the damage. But if you can keep it up long term, then it will start to make improvements. So some of the common issues that I see with eating during the day and affecting sleep. I mean, Too low in calories is one of the most common ones. And this can be intentional with someone actively dieting and trying to keep their calories low, or it can be unintentional with someone just being really busy or not realizing that they need more food. But the low calories means that people are running out of energy. They're running out of energy either prior to going to sleep or while they're asleep, and those stress hormones then come up and then negatively impact on sleep. Sometimes it's not the calories per se, but how someone's eating is structured. So lots of people I'll find with sleep issues, they'll do very little eating during the daytime. And this is often because they're just so busy. So they have a really quick breakfast, and then the rest of the day they're rushing around, or their head is buried in a computer, or they're in meetings all day. And they then get home and they're ravenous, and they do a huge amount of eating in that evening time. And this food can then sit very heavy, and it can affect their ability to sleep from a physical sense, in terms of they just don't feel comfortable. Or even if they are digesting it well, they may be not getting as much out of it because it was just too much food all at once. So they're not getting as much energy out of that food. Also, if there's been a huge amount of stress all day and that this hasn't been mediated or turned off through eating, this is then going to have an impact on physiology. So whatever is going on, the pattern of too little food during the day and then lots in the evening time is a real impactor on sleep. And if this is then combined with someone in the evening sitting down and watching TV as their way of relaxing and winding down after a stressful day, I mean, this is then just setting up further for sleep troubles. So if someone has sleep troubles and they know that this is a common issue, yes, I focus on what they're doing during the day, but I also typically recommend having a snack before going to bed. And I recommend picking something that's pretty easy to digest and won't sit too heavy, because you don't want to have that feeling of like you've had a huge meal and you're trying to sleep it off. So some suggestions would be a warm glass of milk with some figs or some dates or some kind of dried fruit, having some cheese and some crackers, or having some stewed fruits, so some apples or pears or some kind of berries that are stewed that you have with some yogurt or some custard or some cream, or even a small bowl of ice cream has been really helpful for lots of clients to help them get off to sleep and just giving them that last bit of energy that can then take them through the night. And the nighttime snack can only do so much. So if you fail to eat properly during the day, then this nighttime snack, it's not going to be the cure-all. But if you're combining good eating during the day and then getting in that final amount of extra energy before going to sleep, it can just help to take you through the night. If you're having issues where you're regularly waking up in the night, I suggest in the short term to be keeping a snack on your bedside table. And as I mentioned, most of the time when people are waking up in the night, it's linking to stress hormones and low energy. And the easiest way to remedy this is to bring in some food. And I recommend keeping something on the bedside table so when you wake up, you can just reach and just have it. You don't have to be going to the kitchen and turning on lights and rummaging around and trying to find something, because all of these things are just going to wake you up more and you're wanting to really do the opposite. So I'd suggest having snacks on the nightstand, something like a banana or some pretzels or some crisps, or having even some chocolate. Salt seems to be really helpful at this point of the night at shutting off this process. So making sure or experimenting with having something salty and carby at this time is a good suggestion. Matt Stone recommends keeping a mixture of sugar or salt in a jar beside your bed for these situations. And this mixture, you have to work out what it should be for your palatability. And so the ratio can be anywhere from about 5-1 to 10-1 for sugar versus salt. So you want to be able to get it in without it being this horrible tasting substance, but you also want to have enough salt in there to be able to do what it's trying to do in terms of turning off that stress. And so what you want to do if you wake in the night, you take a tablespoon of that sugar and salt mix and you put it on your tongue and you let it dissolve. And this will help to shut off that stress response and allow you to get back to sleep. When I've tried this with clients, some people it worked for and some people it didn't. And often this mixture, it just isn't enough calories to shut things off. And so 1 tablespoon isn't enough. So rather than getting people to be having like 3 tablespoons or 4 tablespoons, it just is easier to say, look, have a banana and a couple of pretzels. and do it that way. So if you are waking up in the night, really you're wanting to just get back to sleep as soon as you can. So don't be thinking along lines, oh, well, sugar's not good for you, or I shouldn't be eating something at nighttime. Why am I having a banana in the middle of the night? Like, the most important thing for you at that stage is getting you back to sleep. And obviously, this isn't a long-term solution. It should be about you making changes to your diet and your lifestyle during the waking hours so you're not needing that snack at night. But in the short term, while it's happening, have whatever you need to as a snack to get you back to sleep. Getting some sunshine during the day is really important, which I've already talked about. And in the winter months, this might not be so easy. So using something like light therapy in these darker months can be really helpful and appropriate. So if you go on to Amazon.com, you can find a huge range of SAD lights, which is seasonal affective disorder. And these are special lights that are much brighter than normal lights and can therefore provide more benefits. And most of their brightness, when you look at how it's listed, is based on lux. And lux is a measure of intensity of the light on the human eye. And for light therapy, most of the lights or the SAD lights that you want to be going for is one where you're looking at 10,000 lux or more. And this is normally the equivalent of the brightness of sunlight on a cloudless day. And most of the light therapy lights focus a lot on lux, but not so much on wavelength. And so I know I've talked about near infrared and red and how beneficial that is. And a lot of the time when they are talking about wavelength with these light therapy lights or the SAD lights, they actually focus on the blue light. And I know I've said that blue light isn't great for energy production, but it can be useful for modulating circadian rhythm. And so a lot of this research about circadian rhythm has been picked up by the SAD lights. And so that's what they normally talk about on the products. And this means that for most SAD lights, the benefit comes from the brightness, but not so much from the benefits of getting in the red or near infrared light. And this means that these SAD lights aren't great for you to be using at nighttime because they're then giving you high amounts of the blue light that I'm trying to get you to avoid and be using flux and other blockers to avoid. But these can give you much better light exposure if you're then using them during the daytime. And so often when the sun is rising in the morning, it does have a fair bit of blue light coming into it. And so it can be beneficial in terms of circadian rhythm. But you want to be using these kind of light therapy lights during the daytime as opposed to the nighttime. If you are going to get a SAD lamp, I highly recommend getting one that doubles as a dawn simulator. And so a dawn simulator is a lamp that you can program so it can slowly turn on. And you ideally will then use this in the morning time to mimic a rising sun. So waking up in total darkness to the beeping of a phone can be rather frightful for the body. And if your room is pitch black, it's pretty tempting to just hit the snooze button. But with a dawn simulator, you get a slowly increasing brightness of light, which really mimics an accelerated sunrise. You normally set it so it then comes on over a 15-minute or a 30-minute period. And this helps to gently wake the body, so when your alarm does go off, you're already much more awake. Or maybe you don't even need to have an alarm because the dawn simulator is enough to wake you up on your own. And personally, I've used a dawn simulator for the last 7 or 8 years, and I can't recommend one highly enough. And I consider myself a real morning person. But with no artificial light coming in during the winter months, getting up can be much more difficult. And I really only use a dawn simulator in the winter months. And it just means that I'll start to stir as the light comes up. And so when my alarm goes off, I'm normally already awake or I'm just dozing and wake very easily. And so the best way to increase your exposure to the useful red and near infrared lights through the winter months is to make your own lamp. And you can purchase 250 watt incandescent bulbs, and you can get these in white or in red. And you then need to get a chicken light or a broader light or a heat lamp. All of these are the exact same thing. They just have a different name. And the reason that you need to get that light fixture is because most lamps and lights have a max watt of around 40 or 60 watt. And the bulb that I'm recommending here is 250 watt. So it is a little bit more work to get these two things, but it means that you're going to get much more of that benefit from being able to expose yourself to the red and near infrared red light. And to make the most of this red light, you want to be using it during a period where you can be exposing as much skin as possible. So for 15 minutes a day, lie on your bed with minimal clothes on or just in your underwear with the light shining on your body. And you want it to be close enough to your skin so you're getting the light, but not so close that it starts to burn, because these light globes do put out a bit of heat. And so starting off with 15 minutes a day, and then over a period of a month, you may increase it to 30 minutes a day. And the best time for you to be doing this light therapy is first thing in the morning or after sunset in the early evening time. So the next suggestion would be to be aware of your hydration and how this can affect your sleep. So dehydration as well as overhydration can both impact on your sleep quality. And so waking in the night to urinate, while I think it's common, shouldn't really be happening. You should be able to make it through the night without having to wake up to use the bathroom. And sometimes this can directly relate to someone having too many fluids in the evening time. So if you're someone who drinks a lot of water, a lot of herbal teas, or a lot of drinks in the evening time, and then you wake up to urinate, then try cutting down on this and see if it helps. But urination also links into energy production and what's going on at the cell level. And this isn't something I want to go into detail now. It's a topic I'm going to cover in a future podcast. And it's something I've written about before. So I'm going to link to an article in the show notes that you can read about. But in a general sense, when the body isn't managing stress levels, and if it's in a low energy state and your cells aren't working as well as they should be, frequency in urination is much more common. And this can also lead to nighttime urination as well. So in this instance, it's not so much just focusing on the fluid intake, but it's also focusing on the food intake that someone has and focusing on this during the daytime to avoid that nighttime urination. Dehydration is also, or can also be, an issue. You don't want to be waking in the night feeling really parched and having to guzzle down a big glass of water. And what I would say is I commonly see this alongside people who get restless legs. And there are lots of different reasons for why someone can get restless legs, but one of these can be dehydration and a buildup of sodium within the blood. So if you're someone who is prone to getting restless legs, you wake up in the night and you're having to drink lots of water, you forget to drink fluids during the daytime, you have much darker urine, you get that sense of I'm dehydrated, then I would really focus on upping your fluids during the day because it's going to help you to get better sleep during the night. Another tip would be removing the clock or a clock from view in your room. And this is especially important for those who have difficult time getting to sleep or who wake in the night. Like, the last thing you need when you can't fall asleep is seeing a clock while you're still awake and noticing, okay, now it's 11 o'clock, now it's 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, etc. And the same thing if you're waking in the night. The last thing you want to do is see those glowing numbers of the bedside clock telling you what time it is, and you're starting to work out how many more hours it is before you're going to have to get up. And it just adds this whole psychological torture to the situation. And it's likely you're then going to be mentally counting down the hours, and this just adds extra stress and prevents you from, or possibly prevents you from, getting back to sleep or getting to sleep quicker. For some people, it's best to remove or unplug all electrical appliances in their room. And electrical impulses come out of appliances, and these can be affecting the quality of sleep or just affecting your ability to actually fall off to sleep. So if you're having issues with your sleep and you've tried lots of other things in terms of eating and other methods that I've suggested, maybe trying to unplug all the electrical items in your room can help. Turning phones onto airplane mode and even turning off the Wi-Fi within the house. If you do need to have certain appliances plugged in the room, so like you want to use a dawn simulator, then I'd move this as far away from the bed as possible. There's a great section in the book called Solving the Paleo Solution by Matt Stone and Dr. Garrett Smith. And Dr. Garrett Smith talks about how technology can be interfering with health and with sleeping. And I don't think people need to go back to living in a cave, and that's definitely not what they suggest. but it is a really eye-opening read about how these things, especially Wi-Fi and mobile phones, can be impacting on sleep and impacting on the body. So I'll include a link to the book in the show notes, but it's just something for you to keep in mind. Being aware of your physical activity during the daytime and even in the evening time and how this impacts on your sleep. So lots of clients do well going for a walk after dinner or doing some gentle stretching or some yoga or something like that before going to bed or late in the evening time, because it helps to get them in a more relaxed state. It helps to just get them to calm down and means that they get to sleep much easier. But you can also have exercise that's at the other end of that spectrum. So doing intense exercise is a stress on the body. And this doesn't make it inherently bad. It's really that stress that leads to the adaptations and the benefit from exercise. But this can take a while to wind down from. And if you're doing this in the evening time, it can then be impacting on the quality of your sleep. And everyone has different time pressures and demands on their life. And it might be that the evening time is the only time that someone has a chance to do exercise. But I'd just be conscious of how this affects your sleep. So pay attention to your sleep on exercise versus non-exercise day and see what happens. And sometimes it's not the exercise as much as how the exercise then affects eating patterns. So maybe you can keep up the exercise in the evening, but you have to be having a bigger meal before you do it, and then have a decent snack or a decent meal after exercise or on the way home from exercise. And I know from experience with clients that often they'll be doing exercise in the evening after work, and it means that they might have a decent lunch, but then they have a tiny snack in the afternoon because they say they don't want to be too full before exercise. Then they go and do the exercise, and by the time they get home, it's like really late, and they say that they don't want to have a proper meal, so they only have a small meal. And so it means that the last time they had something proper to eat was at lunchtime, and they'd done a whole heap of energy sapping exercise and then not given anything back to their body for that. And this means that it doesn't shut off that stress response, and it can be perpetuating that situation. And so it means that the clients in those situations are much more likely to be having problems with their sleep, and this could be improved simply by changing the eating. And the eating might not resolve it, and it might mean that someone just can't exercise in the evening, or at least can't exercise to the intensity that they have previously. But I would be paying attention to those two things. The final suggestion to help with sleep is Epsom salt baths, and having an Epsom salt bath before sleep. Epsom salts are really high in magnesium, and magnesium has many roles to play in the body. But in terms of magnesium as a sleep aid, it can help to relax muscles, it helps to relax the nervous system. It's important for cellular functioning and is one of your electrolytes, so really important for energy production at the cell level. So most of the times, if I have clients who have sleep problems, on the nights where I suggest that they have the Epsom salt baths, they notice that they sleep much better. So it is something that I suggest you try it. And I would say that even if you're not having sleep problems, even if you think you sleep really well, I still encourage people to do Epsom salt baths, because normally when they do them, they notice that they sleep even better, or that they are getting benefits from it, because it is really healing for the body. So that is it for this podcast on sleep. And I can't overstate how important good quality sleep is for health. If it's not something that you regularly experience, then I would say make it a priority. If I'm seeing a client with lots of different issues and sleep is one of them, sleep is the first thing that I focus on, just because it has such a knock-on effect with so many other systems and so many other functions within the body. And if you can start to follow the tips that I've given throughout this podcast, you should notice that things start to improve. So that's it for this week. I hope you have a good week, and I'll catch you next week on the podcast.
Thanks for listening to Real Health Radio. If you are interested in more details, you can find them at the 7 Health website. That's www.7health.com.